Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my standard review of the new Laowa 35mm F0.95. That's right, larger than F1, F0.95, and it's under their new Argus Premium brand. Now, if you want a deeper dive into this lens and all that it entails, I recommend that you take a look at my definitive review, which you can access here. Today, however, I'm going to give you a quicker, more to the point overview of this lens, and so you can determine whether or not it's a lens that you might be interested in for yourself. If you're unfamiliar with Laowa, this is a brand out of China that has been making a lot of very creative and beautifully made lenses from the very beginning. And they had previously released a 33mm f0.95 Argus lens for APS-C. But this is taking that concept a whole step further because it takes a lot more engineering chops to pull off a huge maximum aperture lens like this on a full frame platform, which is what they are doing. And so it's being released in Canon RF, which I'm reviewing here, Sony FE, and then Nikon Z or Z as well. And so it is a lens, obviously, that is designed for a certain type of photographer. The reality is that not every photographer needs a lens with such a huge maximum aperture. There are only certain applications where that is useful. That tiny a depth of field is only useful under certain conditions, and there are some engineering challenges optically that are going to be inherent in such a lens if you don't make it, the size of a barrel. And they have managed to make this lens a very reasonably sized. It is basically about the same size as actually a tiny bit smaller than my Canon 35mm f1.4L Mark II. It's also about 5 grams lighter, and so overall it is a reasonably sized lens for having a huge maximum aperture. In fact, in this case, it is over about a stop and a quarter, a larger maximum aperture than what that Canon 35mm lens is. And so, to make it moderately sized and to keep the weight down. Now, this lens does have heft to it, but Laowa lenses typically do because they're all metal, really high grade construction that in many ways reminds me of classic Zeiss lenses in the way that they are built. And thankfully that applies even to the beautifully damped. It just glides along buttery smooth. The manual focus ring, this is a manual everything lens. And so you have manual focus, manual aperture, and unfortunately no electronics here. And that's the one area that I really think that it's time for Laowa to move forward a little bit. Enabling some of that electronic communication just on modern mirrorless bodies does give certain benefits. For one thing, it helps, a camera with in-body image stabilization to know the focal length and to adjust accordingly. It means that you're going to get more of your XF information that is transmitted back to your, into your files and thus into your editing software, which might make it easier to apply a profile or to find files from a certain lens if you're looking in your catalog. There's just a lot of benefits there, and I would love to see them tackle that. But what is certainly true is that everything that is here is gorgeous. It is just beautifully made. It has a kind of a satin black anodized finish to it, and then it has an aperture ring that gives you the dual approach to it. You can either click it or declick it, and so it moves along very nicely. The detents, the clicks, are not super strong. You can definitely feel them, and if you're in the declicked mode, or excuse me, the clicked mode, and no problem finding your aperture, but it's just a little bit less obvious than what it is on some other aperture rings. And if you're wanting to do for video purposes, or you just like a declicked aperture, you can declick that, and so you can rack right through it. So obviously this is a lens that is going to have some appeal for people that do video with that gorgeous manual focus ring that, by the way, has a great, nice long focus throw that allows you to have precision without going to an extreme. And at the same time being able to declick that aperture is going to give you some creative options. Even more so, that's going to give you creative options, however, is that huge maximum aperture that lets in a tremendous amount of light. So this can be a very intriguing lens for those of you that shoot in very dim environments, maybe in clubs or venues for music where the lighting is low, and having a huge maximum aperture is going to bring a lot of benefit. Understand, however, that whenever you engineer with such a huge maximum aperture, there are some certain challenges that come. So in this case, the sweet spot for this lens at f/0.95 is right dead center in the frame, where you actually have fairly usable sharpness and contrast. But very quickly, even towards the middle of the frame, you're going to see a drop off quite swiftly in terms of that overall acuity, ability to render fine details. And as you move towards the frame, edge of the frame, that becomes even more pronounced. And so the mid frame is not going to get truly sharp, kind of like what the center is, until around f2, and in the corners it's going to take somewhere closer to f4 before you get sharpness across the frame. However, at smaller apertures, this lens is extremely sharp all across the frame and delivers very crisp details even on my 45 megapixel Canon EOS R5. And so it's a lens with somewhat of a dual or split personality, much like what I saw when I reviewed on Sony the Voigtlander Nocton 40mm f1.2, and that lens also showed the same kind of profile, that wide open images are a little bit kind of dreamy is the way that they're often described, but with beautiful distinctive bokeh. But then if you stop the lens down, it starts to rapidly pick up contrast and then reaches a place where it is very, very sharp all across the frame. The Argus 35 is just like that in its performance. And so if you are a creative type, it means you can approach scenes with with some options. You can either render them in a more artsy, kind of blooming kind of look, dreamy look, or you can stop down and get more of that modern bite and sharpness and contrast to your images. So for a certain type of photographer, I think that this is going to be a very interesting lens, particularly when you consider that it retails at right about $900 US. And so obviously, to have a full frame lens with a maximum aperture of f/0.95 and a beautiful build like this, if you're comparing it to a Zeiss type lens, that's a very nice price. At the same time, it is going to be more expensive than what many photographers are going to want to invest in a lens like this that they might only use occasionally. And so I think that it's important for you to make a determination as to what kind of photographer you actually are, or what kind of photography you actually want to do. And if you want to do some of the things that I've described and take some of the shots that I've been showing in this review, then this is a lens that may have an appeal to you, and certainly is fairly unique on these platforms for doing what it does. And so it will unlock a lot of creative opportunities for you. But at the same time, the fact that it's manual everything means that for the mainstream, it's not going to be a lens for them. But if you're one of those that maybe marches to the beat of your own drum and are a little bit less conventional, take a long look at the Laowa 35mm f/0.95 Argus lens. It is pretty unique, and if you use it right, pretty cool. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my full text review. You can also find linkage to an image gallery. Make sure to check out those photos. It gives you a sense of what the lens can do. Beyond that, there's also linkage to follow me on social media, to become a patron, sign up for my newsletter, purchase some of my merchandise, and of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Be sure to click that, ring that bell so you get notifications when new content drops. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.